Hi, this is Hans Hartmann. I'm the co-chair of Visual First, our conference that will start October 4th and 5th. More about it is on our website, visualfirst.biz. Right now, dive into the podcast.
The Dead Pixel Society podcast is brought to you by Media Clip, Advertech Printing, and Got Photo. Welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast, the photo imaging industry's leading news source. Here's your host, Gary Pageau.
Hello again, and welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. I'm your host, Gary Pageau, and today we're joined by commercial photographer Robert Lowdon. Robert's coming to us from Toronto, Canada today. How are you today, Robert?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So you've been a commercial photographer, primarily focusing on the industrial side of the business, like photographing big machines, big skyscrapers, big things. How did you decide as a photographer that that's where you wanted to focus your efforts?
That's a good question. I think it kind of came a little organically. I always wanted to be on the commercial side when I came out of school. Mm-hmm. I was never one to want to shoot weddings and that stuff. I know some people do. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I was always like, I want to work with businesses. Mm-hmm. And then I got into more like the industrial stuff, I think just because I found it really interesting. It's really cool to be able to do and see these things that I think like a lot of people don't get to do. And it's kind of like photography in a way has become like a passport for that for me. So that's probably, yeah.
So where did you go to school? Did you always want to be a photographer?
For sure. So I went to Red River College in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. It's right in the center of Canada in the prairies. I think since my early teens, I wanted to be a photographer. Definitely had it was a long road to get to that point, but I'd say probably, yeah. Early teens.
And when you left school, did you intern somewhere? Did you work? Most people before they strike out on their own, build their portfolio working for another company. And so since you didn't want to shoot human beings, where do you start on that path?
To be honest, I came out of school and I just realized that there was no photography jobs for me in Winnipeg.
And about in what time period was this?
2012. I'd done some paid work before I went to school. Nothing I would put on my resume. Yeah, sure. But yeah, there were no jobs. And like, I guess too, like the whole digital thing was kind of like had the impact on the industry and things. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of photographers that were shutting down and then there was new ones coming up. And I just looked at the landscape and I was like, well, if I want to do this, I have to start my business and there's no other way. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's what I did. Yeah.
Which is, kind of tough, I think, because you don't have much of a portfolio. You don't have much of I'm sure you have, a portfolio that you have from school, but if you're breaking into business, you don't have client work to show. So how did you build that?
I think I just really worked on some advertising, Google search. I really recommended to anyone starting out is to you treat it like a job until it is your job. Mm-hmm. Okay. You put in the 8 hours every day, even if you got another job that, allows you to eat and pay your rent,
allows you to eat.
That's basically it, right? Yeah, anyone who started a business kind of knows that.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And just shooting things that were relevant and just you build a client over time and another one comes and then more and more opportunities come. It would probably be weird for someone to look at my portfolio now and see all the things I've shot. Mm-hmm. But I definitely didn't have access to those at the start. Mm-hmm. It's just, you're just seeing years and years of progress towards that.
So a lot of photographers get into the business because they like the technical side of it. They like the process of taking a picture. They like maybe working with subjects. They like a type of photography, wedding photography, whatnot. But they're not so great at the other aspects of building the business, right? So what do you think your strengths are, and what did you have to work on to build the business?
Yeah, I think I'd say I'm a pretty technical person myself too. But I didn't let the technical part stick to photography for me. I really went into SEO. I really learned how to build websites. I learned marketing. I did like lots of things that are required to build a business. And I think for me, I was really not focused on building a photography business, but building a good running business for me. So I tried to look at other businesses more than I think I chased the model of what a photography business is.
Okay. So when do you think your breakthrough came in terms of you started getting the clients you were really looking for, right? So it's like, man, I really want to photograph that caterpillar earth mover monster thing. And you were getting those jobs. I mean, how long did that take? And how long did I'm assuming you had a day job when you started, right? So how long did it take you to wean yourself off the day job?
I had the day job for about a year, roughly. And then I was making good enough money that I took the jump. And then the bottom kind of fell out of it. then it went back up. And then it's, like they say, everyone says the path to success, right, is like the straight diagonal line, but it's actually more of like, what's the phrase? It's more like squiggly line.
I say a heartbeat. I say it's a heartbeat.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Yeah. So I guess to answer your question though, I mean, in some days, like I look back at it and I go like, wow, like we're traveling across the country, we're shooting for these like really giant companies. And like, if you asked me 10 years ago, like this is my dream come true now, but now being in it, I mean, also too, I am always looking towards that next level too, which is kind of strange. I don't feel like I'm done yet, if that makes sense.
So by the next level, you're incorporating video into what you're doing. You're doing anything with drones, or what's your day-to-day kit that you would bring to, let's say, you're doing a skyscraper in process photographic shoot?
For sure. So if we're looking at like a lot of our shoots are like, it depends what we're doing. Like we might be shooting the workers. Or we might be shooting the building. And those are different jobs, right? So if we're doing like say we're doing architecture, so if we're doing an interior, we're bringing in lighting, stands, like batteries, cameras, lenses, all that stuff, right? If we're doing video, that can go from something as simple as like a DSLR up to like a red camera, up to like full on like RE lights and that whole thing. We do use drones too. I got my advanced license up here, which would be the same as I think it's a Part 107 in the US.
Okay.
Yeah. And then for that, I primarily fly like a DJI Inspire 2 for that. So, yeah.
So I imagine you've had to, because of the types of clientele you work with, have to be really up on your insurance, your certifications, and there's a lot of logistical paperwork, I'm sure, that has to happen, NDAs and all those kind of things. Do you think that keeps people out of competing in your sector, or because it sort of raises the barrier to entry, doesn't it?
It does, but I think a lot of people just don't think it's that cool. I think they think it's cool to hang out with celebrities and fashion models all day, but like I can tell you, like it's not. That's not fun.
Yeah, they're not often nice people, but sometimes the guy driving the forklift is one of the nicest people you'd want to meet, right?
Yeah. You just get to like, I have this one client where I like ride trains and photograph the trains and stuff, and like that's just, to me, that's just amazing. Like,
yeah, because I mean that's really the kind of stuff. It's sort of the that used to be like the hallmark of, I'm thinking like 1930s and 1940s photography, like when the industrial in America you had the industrial, not revolution, but sort of the second wave of the Industrial Revolution during when the automotive era was just starting, and you had all those cool, people taking pictures of plants and things being made and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And now that we've gotten into the digital age, it's like, your average person isn't turning a wrench somewhere. They're tapping on a keyboard, and that isn't quite as visually interesting.
It's not, there's something to be said about people that make things too, right? They're kind of, I don't know. I get a kick out of it. I get a kick out of, people who make things for a living and things that are being built. And, like a lot of this stuff is just very complex processes and takes thousands of people just to produce. And it's not as focused on, I guess, as the next new social media thing anymore. But I think to me, it's interesting. It's like, yeah.
Well, and that's one of those things where, obviously, if you have an interest in it, then your work is going to be better, right?
Yeah.
If you got the call from, Kim Kardashian's agent and said, she's opening up the new cabaret and we'd like you to shoot the party, you'd probably go, ugh.
Yeah.
You'd be the only photographer in Toronto who would say that, but you'd be the one.
I might be, yeah, because there are jobs we do not do because they are not a good fit, Yeah, and I think too, like people who are hiring a photographer, like you want the photographer that's really interested in what it is you're doing, right? Like you want that person. Like people ask me why I don't shoot weddings, and it's like, to be honest, like for me, weddings aren't that big of a deal. Like my wedding was fantastic, but I'm not that passionate about people's weddings. So like, get the person who is, right. Yeah. If you want a tractor factory, like I'm there, but if you want a wedding, like no.
So how do you convey to, a corporate media buyer, right? Or the client, this passion? How do you convey to him that's like, I am jacked to go see your train, depot. I'm just thrilled by that. How do you, in terms of, because you gotta sell yourself, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, like a lot of it just comes in, like honestly, just comes in through the website, right? I just have the work there. We really worked on our marketing strategy to show like what we're about and what we convey. And I think I just really try to be authentic with our clients. Like if I'm excited, it's because I'm excited. I'm not very over the top, and I kind of just try to speak from my heart on things and be truthful, I guess. And I think that's what comes across. I've been told that like the reason we're hired on some of these projects is because we sound like the ones that are the most interested in it. So I mean, yeah.
So you mentioned the word "we" a couple of times. How big is your team? What is it? You and an assistant, or is that the royal we? Is it just you most of the time, or?
It was just me. Now it's my wife too. So we run the company. And then how it works is if we need to contract people, that's how we go. So we have like the two of us, which are the owner's partners now, that run it. And then depending on how we need to scale, we have some contractors or whichever that we need to do, get things done. So
it sounds to me like, as you said earlier, you have a technical aptitude. Right. Clearly you're built that way. You took your photographic skills and you said, I need some internet skills, I need some digital marketing skills and all these things. How have you incorporated lean principles into some of your activities?
For sure. I think it's probably one of the most important things if anyone's started.
And what is lean principles for those who don't know? What is your definition and how have you incorporated them?
So my definition, which is probably not the right definition.
Exactly.
Someone can correct me. I'm sure they will. There's always someone, right? So my definition is you're basically sticking to a strict budget, not overspending, not wasting money on capital and things that you don't need. For my type of work, to have a studio is ridiculous because I would never be in the studio. So I think for me, that's it. So there's things like we just mentioned, like with contractors, instead of having full-time staff where a full-time staff person might not be required.
Right.
Things like that.
Now, do you rent some of your equipment or all of it? I mean, when does it make sense for you to buy a piece of equipment versus renting? Because I know a lot of pros rent for jobs.
For sure. So most of my camera equipment and drone equipment will be owned.
Mm-hmm.
The decision to purchase is generally for two main factors. One is when cost of renting exceeds cost of ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second is availability.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes renting, it sucks. Like, well, it does, right? Like some shops don't have availability. The hours aren't conducive to renting for a commercial job, right? Because if you have to rent 2 days out more, or things like.
Well, how far out, typically, how far out do you plan? You don't get, I mean, do you get literally calls saying, I need you at the train depot tomorrow at 8, or do you have some time to plan?
I do now. There was definitely a time where it was like that, like 2 days notice. Now we're about at least a month, couple months, sometimes even 3 months. That's just been getting busier too, right? Yeah. It gets easier when you get a little bigger, I guess.
So getting back to the lean principles, what were some of the do you have any tools or processes that you've adopted from other industries or other like workshops or something you attended? Is there like a spreadsheet you use or anything like that?
No, there's not. It's kind of just stuck in my head. My wife's more of the organized, written down. I'm more of the ideas scatterbrained all over.
Okay. Sounds like you complement each other well then.
Yeah. But I mean, to be honest though, too, like there are some processes too. Like we try to do things ourselves before we look at contracting them out. I've learned this lesson so many times as a business owner, and I keep learning this lesson that I need to be able to know how to do things, almost everything, before I hire someone to do it. And that's because that's not trying to overstep my bounds on things or try to know everything. That's because if I don't know what it is, I can't hold someone accountable to what's acceptable when I'm paying for a service, right? So we've had issues before where we've hired companies that haven't come up to the plate of what we think is acceptable. But if we don't know that, you get in trouble pretty quick. And yeah.
Well, that's a very interesting point, because that is something that a lot of people are doing now with, gig economy and all these other things is they're using services or contractors to fill in gaps, right? Where they, maybe have someone blogging for them, or they may have someone doing their social media, or they maybe having somebody doing their, some other facet of their work. But what you're saying is that it's even if you do that, you should have a base understanding of what's supposed to be happening there.
Yeah, 100%. And it to be honest, like it's very dangerous to trust someone to do all your marketing and all your social media and your blogging with no idea of if they're even doing it properly, because that's your number one way to get business, right? It's the most important thing. It's honestly probably the last thing you should ever give anyone to do.
Which is kind of interesting, because I mean, there's, my world is filled with people who are, that's their gig. They're doing it for other people, right?
Yeah. And I think that's good. And I should clarify, like, that is good to contract that out, but you should know what you're contracting out to, because even like a contractor, right? Like it's hard for you to just say to them, oh, I want you to write some tweets, or they're like, about what? It's like for us, right? Like someone comes to me and says, I want some photos for my business. Of what? Like,
It could be for, a new product rollout, or it could be for something, or historical. You have no idea. That's
Yeah. It's I don't know. In some ways though, maybe it's not their fault, because like so much of this stuff is just so surface level now too, right? Like you hear this like
So how much of your time is travel versus, because like you say, you don't have a studio, so I'm sure you work out of a home or a garage office or something similar.
Yeah.
So how much of your time is travel, and how do you control your costs in today's sort of crazy world of travel?
Oh, geez. we were just gone for a whole month. We were gone right across Canada for an entire month, and we got home last week. So it was the first time I slept in my bed in over 30 something days. And And travel is insane right now. It is so expensive.
Yeah. So, do you travel? Obviously you seem to like trains. You travel by train, or do you fly everywhere? And how is it like if you're bringing equipment you own? There's a lot of logistic challenges there. So if it's just you and your wife.
Yeah, it's very difficult. That even like when I'm flying on my own in Canada, it's very hard to find good rentals across the country. Toronto, major city, you can get everything here like you could get in New York or anywhere else, right? Problems become when you get to smaller cities across Canada. Even some of the major centers you think you'd be able to rent, that you can't get certain specialty equipment. The basics are always there. So I generally, if I'm flying with equipment in cases.
Oh my gosh, I imagine you have a couple stories there.
Like it's always worked out. I don't know how. Every time I put the drone under the plane, because it has to go under there, it terrifies me, right? Because this thing's worth $12,000 and it's going to get chucked around by some guy.
and you got the gorillas down below, who are throwing their luggage in there. Exactly. So are you? Obviously you're packing your equipment yourself, so you must be very conscientious of that.
Yeah. Like most stuff you're carrying on, you're trying to carry on. Longer trips will drive too. Like I'll drive. That can be anything within 4 hours. I'll probably just drive because it's just easier. Yeah. Like when you add even before this, right? Like when you add your time at the airport and then you're waiting on bags and all this stuff, like
that's easily 4 hours. 3 or 4 hours there. If you figure, an hour, 45 minutes to get to the airport, an hour waiting until you get something to eat, then you board, then you fly for an hour. It's the same. I do the same thing. If it's within 4 hours, I'll drive. But what are some of the best places you have visited as a sort of this traveling photographer? Because I imagine you got quite a bit of business, I'm sure, in the Toronto area, because like you said, it's a major industrial area within in Canada and Ontario. But have there been any place because I love Canada, I would, just the whole Western states is just wild for, a great appeal for me. So where are some of the places you've been?
Oh, in Canada?
Yeah. Some of the greatest places.
The greatest place. I've probably been everywhere. I went to the Arctic once. I went up to.
I was going to ask you, did you go to Nunavut? Did you go that far up?
Yeah, actually, I went to Nunavut. Yeah, a place called Arviat. It's like 40 people. It's right on Hudson's Bay, if you know where that is. Yeah. It's. I went in summer to shoot a building, and it's so weird. There's no trees at all. Like it's above the tree line, right? And you can see from the plane, it almost looks like Swiss cheese. There's just millions of lakes. That's more water than ground, right? It's all rocks and like some like it's like a grass or muskeg type. And that's it. And it's colors just amazing.
Wow.
I was just in Victoria, Vancouver Island, there. Went through Banff, went through all of BC. Yeah. And then the East Coast too, like Halifax, PI, places like that.
Newfoundland?
I actually haven't been to Newfoundland yet. We've
tried. I had a good friend in the photo industry who was basically the only camera store in Newfoundland, right? Tooten's Camera, for those who remember.
Yeah.
I always wanted to go there. That's a very interesting part of the planet.
You should. It's supposed to be very beautiful. There was a few jobs we were supposed to go to, and then COVID kind of kicked in and ruined those ones. But that might happen in the future. Every time I get something, it always just seems to fall through with Newfoundland. I don't know. Maybe they don't want me there or something. I don't know.
Well, it's almost Europe. It's that far east. So tell me a little bit about COVID, because I don't want to turn this into a COVID retrospective, but it seems like it's impacted a lot of the people I talk to for the podcast. You were kind of in an unusual situation, I think, because you didn't rely on weddings or social gatherings for your business. So I'm sure there was an impact. Did it change your plans much? Was it more of a hiccup than a full stop, or what was it?
It was like a really weird experience for us. So I'm not sure if you know, but Toronto was considered the most locked down city in the world at one point. We had quite a few lockdowns here and shutdowns.
Yeah.
So basically when we went into shutdowns, like that was closed for business. We couldn't do anything really. And even the things that we could do, clients weren't really considering that it could be done. So we were off. But the weird thing about it was every time we would open, it would just get insane. So we even actually, like last year, ended up breaking a sales record for our business. It was busier than it had ever been in the past 6 months of the year, which was really strange for us. So it was actually ended up being busier with COVID, which was, I don't know if it had to do with the steps that we took during COVID, because we're still a growing business.
Right.
And I can go into further, I don't want to go on too long about that, but I can go into further to some of like the things we did when COVID started to kind of maybe ramp our business up. But for us, it was, I don't know, it was good and bad. It's not a good situation, but it was also good for the business and bad for the business. But at the end, we came out better than we started. So yeah.
How do you keep the creative juices going? Like you said, you've been at this for a while. You built a business. You brought on another person, and you still got to get out of bed and want to do it. So how do you keep those juices flowing?
Oh, that's a good question. I sometimes feel like I don't have a choice, to be honest. I don't know. I just have this drive to like do something that is at times probably a little bit unhealthy, to just keep going and get excited about things. And I don't know what it is. Like, I think years ago I could have told you it was like, well, I just have this done, or I do this thing right. But I think there's just something in me that's maybe, yeah, there's something in me that's a little weird, maybe. I don't know if that's a good answer, but
So do you see yourself continuing on this path to keep this business going, or do you think you're going to bring on more people and you'll become more of an oversight role? Because it sounds to me like you're kind of in sort of controlled growth mode. You have as much business as you can take on, and at some point you have to think, well, goodness, there's only so much bandwidth I personally have. I'll bring my wife on board, but what can you do? Do you think you're does that appeal to you at this stage because you're kind of thinking about the future?
Yeah, I think for us, it's a bit more of a hybrid scenario where, and by saying that, I say like, I still always want to be the guy taking the pictures.
Right. Because your name's on the door.
It is. And it's what I enjoy. And I don't want to give away the thing I like the most to someone else, because I think then the passion would go away from it. But we are still in a growth stage, I would say. But our future is more, and my future, what I'm looking for is more expanding internationally into other countries.
Sure.
More larger projects I see as our future. Then more projects itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That makes sense. So if a new skyscraper opens up in Dubai, you want to be there.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess just to qualify that too, like we do work with like a lot of large companies that have imprints around the world, right? So it's like, now that I think about it, yeah, exactly, like that new skyscraper opens in Dubai. That's exactly it. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sure my 3 Dubai listeners have some connections for you. So if they wanted to connect with you, where would they do it? How can people find more information about Robert Lowdon?
For sure. The easiest way is just my website. So it's just my name. It's robertlowdon.com. It's robertlowdon.com. Or you can just Google my name and I show up.
Because you've SEO'd the hell out of your business. You will be the first thing.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, thank you, Robert, for your time and for your expertise in sharing your business. I find it just fascinating, just the type of work you're doing. And I encourage people to go to the website and check out the portfolio there. It is not, if you think this type of photography is dry and unemotional, you will have your opinion changed after reviewing the portfolio. So
awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. Read more great stories and sign up for the newsletter at www.thedeadpixelssociety.com.